I kept ringing, and eventually I managed to get an interview. And the interview was with somebody else. And so I did that interview and they were like, thanks, we'll call you back if we want a second interview. And I was like, no, don't worry, I'll wait. So again, just waited there.
You just waited in the front?
Yeah, until Bob came in. And I was like, come on, let's do the interview now. So I sort of forced my way into a job there. But that's why we ended up setting up Breakfast Club Briefings, which is a place where we can bring planners and politicians together with developers to discuss what they think are good outcomes, which are different to the good outcomes that developers want, because they're not motivated by financial rewards. A lot of our marketing budget every year is spent on putting on events, bringing people together, trying to meet more and more people from the property sector, trying to, again, anticipate things that they will want and need to bring them into our orbit.
Welcome to the People Property Place podcast. Today we are joined by Oliver Lowrie, co-founder and director of Ackroyd Lowrie, an award-winning architect building the cities of the future. Ollie started his career at Architype as a project architect, where he spent 9 years honing his skills in project management, design, and project delivery. He left in 2014 to set up Ackroyd Lowrie with business partner Jon Ackroyd to build an innovative architectural practice with a reputation for putting people at the heart of the design process. They're able to deliver characterful, sustainable, high-quality schemes to anchor new neighbourhoods. As well as his day job, Ollie hosts the popular Urban Forecast podcast, where he speaks to a broad cross-section of guests who are defining the future of our cities. He also manages to find time to run the Breakfast Club Briefings, a series of events focused on bringing together planners, policymakers, developers, and consultants. And it gives me great pleasure that he joins me on the podcast today. So Ollie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
Not at all. Well, look, we've had a number of guests who've come on this podcast whose route into real estate is through architecture. And they kind of go through that process and they realise that actually it's more of the investment, asset management, development, fund management side that they end up on. But you are someone who has stuck in this architectural route. Can you, before we kind of get on to all the amazing things you're doing at Ackroyd Lowrie, can you just tell me a little bit about how and why you got into property?
With pleasure. And I do think that that's really how Jon and myself sort of see ourselves is, we're sort of entrepreneurs first who happen to be architects. And I think that sort of comes across in the story. So, I don't know, when I was at school, I was into kind of art and design and couldn't really work out what to do at university. So I actually studied fine art, did a foundation year, thought it was a bit of a waste of time. And so it kind of gave me the idea that maybe architecture was a bit more of a kind of practical outlay to the use of kind of creative mindset. And, all these years later, I think that it kind of is, although my definition of what I use my creativity for now is kind of different. I have to say now I'm not that hands-on, I'm not drawing stuff particularly often, but I still think that use of kind of creative mindset is important when you're running a business or when you're kind of tackling problems around how to make projects happen. So I have only had one job as an architect. I left university. I actually wasn't very good at uni at my undergrad until the last thing that I ever designed at uni was a school, and it was kind of like theoretical school. Obviously, you don't get to really design stuff, but I really got into the idea of designing a school, and so I sort of graduated and found Architype, who are a practice who focus on sustainability, and a lot of their clients are schools. And it combined the two things that I was really passionate about, so sustainability and then kind of designing educational spaces. So I only went for one interview. I actually went there, I sat in their offices, and I had my CV in my hand. This is in, 2003 or something. And I was like, I want to speak to the boss here. And they were like, who are you? So
you turned up unannounced?
Yeah. And waited till I could hand my CV to the boss, who's this guy called Bob Hayes, who is an absolute hero of mine, just so that I knew that he'd got it. And then I kept ringing, and eventually I managed to get an interview. And the interview was with somebody else. And so I did that interview and they were like, thanks, we'll call you back if we want a second interview. And I was like, no, don't worry, I'll wait. So again, just waited there.
You just waited in the front?
Yeah, until Bob came in. And I was like, come on, let's do the interview now. So I sort of forced my way into a job there. And then, I was there for 9-10 years, loved it, got my part 2, got my part 3, which are all these hurdles, which I feel actually there needs to be some reform of. They go on far too long. But, mostly what you learn is in practice. So I was very lucky that I got a really good grounding in environmental design. That's Architype's, bread and butter. So, my sort of DNA of how I design is from a sustainability mindset, from trying to use environmental factors and natural materials where possible, and always trying to, kind of problem solve around environmental design. After 10 years of doing that, after about 5 years of doing that, Jon Ackroyd, my now business partner, joined Architype. And we were sort of aware of each other, but it wasn't a massive office, but I think we were kind of both the same age and both quite ambitious, and we were never ever put on projects together. So we never really worked together. But we gradually started talking, and we, realized we had quite a lot in common in the way that we thought. And one day we had this opportunity where a sort of family friend had bought a site in Bermondsey, and they got in contact and said, do you want to kind of do some work in your spare time? And we said yes, and managed eventually to get them planning permission for 5 units. And then we then told them to sell the site because they weren't developers. And that was some of the best advice I've ever given, because we then did go on to deliver that project for somebody else. And it was an absolute nightmare with about 12 party wall agreements and a sewer that no one knew about. And they were very lucky to get out. But what happened after that was they sold it, and then there was this gap, never thought about it ever again. And I was on holiday, and somebody rang me up and he said, hi, I've bought this site in Blue Anchor Lane. I was like, oh shit, what's wrong? And he said, no, nothing's wrong. Do you want to do the technical design? And I was like, well, I haven't got a company. And he said, well, look, you know the site, you did the planning, you might as well do the technical design. Just why don't you set up a company? So rang up Jon. I said, do you want to set up a company? We've got client number 1. And that was it. He quit his job. I was still working on a project at Architype. So I think I was doing 1 day a week at Ackroyd Lowrie. He was doing 4 days a week and 1 day back at Architype. And we gradually migrated over. So, the first invoice got paid and we bought first laptop. Second invoice got paid, we bought a printer, got a little office in Shoreditch. In fact, we started in a pub. That was our first office. Our friend had just bought a pub, so we were in there. And it was very organic. And, then we got a second client, and that turned out to be quite a big project. And then within a year or so, we had a team of kind of, 5 or 6 people, 4 or 5 people. And we've been very lucky, but I think we've really grasped any opportunity that we get. I think, luck is, you can't really control some of the things that happen to you. They just happen, and opportunities fall into your lap. But it's what you do with them, I think, that makes a difference. So, that second client that we had was for a film studio. And 10 years later, that chap is still a client of ours. We're working on our 5th studio with him now. And, we actually got the retrofit highly commended award a couple of years ago for Alva King's Cross, which is this amazing old tram shed that we've converted into a film studio for him. So that's been a really, really great relationship. But it's built on really grasping those opportunities and then trying to really do anything we can to preempt what that client will need.
Yeah.
And I think that's really our mentality, is try and, it's about outcomes for our clients. It's sort of not necessarily, as designers, it's not about what we necessarily want. It's all about outcomes for our client, trying to anticipate them, trying to deliver good outcomes for our clients, is really the kind of, I suppose, the ethos of the business.
So before we kind of take that journey on and find out a little bit more about how you managed to scale the business, did you have any family or connections within the real estate space, or did you have any kind of mentors? Was it literally just the culmination of fine art, designing schools, and a bit of serendipity that ended up in your kind of route to real estate?
Well, my mum's a conveyancing solicitor, but it was maybe useful a little bit at the start. So we had this big vision, we wanted to set up this company to design the cities of the future. But as with lots of practices, the thing that you end up doing is kind of people's house extensions. So at the start, having somebody that had done conveyancing in my family was reasonably useful, but not massively. And I think, one of the things that you realise once you jump is you look back your kind of, through your phone, through your black book at everybody that you know in a slightly different light. And I'm sure you've done this, you've set up a business. Suddenly everyone you know, it could be a connection to something. But no, we didn't take any clients with us. We didn't really know many people in the sort of property world. And so we've spent a lot of our marketing budget every year is spent on putting on events, bringing people together, trying to meet more and more people from the property sector, trying to, again, like anticipate things that they will want and need to bring them into our orbit, because we didn't take clients with us, and we didn't naturally have these people in the space. So instead, we quickly worked out there is a way of making people come into your orbit. You have to spend a bit of money, you have to spend a bit of time, but you can if you can give people things that they want, so knowledge or connections to other people, you can bring people sort of into your orbit, and that's what we still try and do.
For someone listening to this who's maybe a little bit more in terms of the investment management, development, asset management, portfolio management type space, can you just break down the different parts of an architect's day job and the different areas and where they kind of maybe get involved with a wider development process?
Sure, yeah. So, some of the clients that we work for are funds. So somebody like DTZI, we work for them, and we will, they've got obviously a portfolio that their funds will own, and every so often some of their leases will expire. So as an example of that, they have an asset on Beak Street where we've been working on that for years now. As leases expire and companies move out, we will go in and we will do a kind of interior design fit out, or we might need to get planning permission for upwards extensions, and or change of uses, and or refitting the whole building. And so that's one way that we can work is kind of gradually with a fund, kind of assisting them to re-gear assets, and get new tenants, get higher per square foot rental on it. Or we'll work for property developers, so somebody like an Avanton who will buy a site, and we will gain planning permission for them, and then they will take investment to build that out. We'll work on the technical design, and then when they're building it out, we'll usually have a site role. So there's kind of 3 or 4 different skill sets that you need. Planning design is slightly different to kind of technical design, and interior design is then kind of different again. But all the way through, we have to have a bit of a project management sort of mindset as well. Although, we do work with lots of project managers, but there's always a little bit of project management that needs to kind of fall back onto architects. And yeah, that's, so our other clients, we work a little bit with kind of end user clients as well. So educational facilities or film studios, but most of our clients are within the property sector. So they're either property developers, housing associations, or funds.
And they're coming and they want you to reimagine, reinvigorate and deliver a best-in-class type scheme that's going to be fit for purpose moving forward.
Exactly, yes. So I think funds and developers have slightly different mindsets. So with a fund, you're trying to kind of reimagine an asset. With a developer, you're often starting from scratch. Although increasingly, I think there's a focus on retrofit rather than knock down and rebuild. So there you're kind of reimagining again. But a lot of our work now is sort of regeneration projects, kind of 100 plus units of resi plus commercial, and there's often existing buildings. We work a lot in London, so it's rare that you get a totally empty site. So we enjoy those projects where you get to do a bit of work with a historical asset, or with something with an existing building, but then also reimagining the spaces around it, and this kind of buzzword of placemaking. What does successful places mean? How can you what are those magic ingredients, and how can we use our design skills and kind of teamwork with people who have got more of a commercial mindset to try and bring in the right people into sort of commercial spaces to really ground a place. Those are the best projects, where you get a good team all working together with the same vision.
to create a destination
exactly.
that will kind of thrive by itself and have all different components.
And then often part of our role is to then sell that vision to a local authority, so to the planners. So if you're starting at an early stage and need to get a change of use or need to get planning permission for a development, it's often down to us and a bit of the planning consultant to sell that vision, to get planning consent. And we realised kind of early on, I think, again, to go back to this thing of trying to put outcomes first, is that planners can be the gatekeeper of a great deal of value to developers. So we realised that actually we should be spending a lot of our time and our money and our marketing spend actually on trying to build good relationships with planners and good, to be able to better understand what planners want. Because we kind of, to a certain extent, we know what our clients want, right? They want a good return on investment. That's why they're in development. But it's harder to know what planners want. And so that's, slightly jumping ahead, but that's why we ended up setting up the Breakfast Club Briefings, which is a place where we can bring planners and politicians together with developers to discuss what they think are good outcomes, which are different to the good outcomes that developers want, because they're not motivated by financial rewards, but they are motivated by things like good placemaking, environmental performance. And you can, if you can understand what, how you can generate win-wins, then that's a sort of outcome-driven way of thinking about your clients.
So taking the story back from you and Jon met at Architype, was it trying to take yourself out of that business? Was that a challenge, or were they, and set up a competing business effectively, or was that a relatively easy thing to do, given the fact you'd had a kind of a client on the side, bit of cash flow coming in, and then it kind of became increasingly obvious that there was a future pipeline of work and your kind of risk was minimized?
Well, I think it was easy because I'm still friends with Bob, who's just one of the most inspiring people that I've ever met. And I never wanted to sour that relationship I don't really think they are competitors of ours. We're in very different spaces. We wanted to take a lot of their design thinking about sustainable principles and apply them to a slightly different context. Their focus is really sort of education, not only, but mostly, and ours is really much more regen. We kind of wanted to take their thinking and apply it to like a city scale almost, of like, how can you make kind of passive house master plans? And, we're still on that route of trying to explore what that really means. But I don't think that it meant that we were never really directly competing. We're still in contact with them. And so it wasn't particularly difficult, and we left on good terms. The challenges came, I think, we've been doing this 10 years now, and we had the Brexit vote, then the implementation of Brexit, then we've had, the Ukraine war, which affected us more than both of those, actually, I think, probably. COVID, cost of living crisis. So, it was those challenges rather than the leaving Architype that were the hard things.
And can you just talk to me about your skill set and then Jon's skill set? And what do you kind of focus on, and then what does Jon focus on?
Yeah, it's a good question, which we get asked a lot. And I think over the years, it's probably changed. I think at the start, honestly, just Jon can add much better than me. He has much better grip of numbers than I do. So that meant that he was going to be looking at the finance stuff more than me. I do slightly more of this type of thing, so a little bit more outward facing. But we both like to mix it up. And Jon also does marketing and sales, but there's probably slightly more lean of me towards outward facing stuff and slightly more lean for him into finance. But as the team's grown, we've got people that do more of that. So it has allowed us to retain the thing that we both kind of enjoy, which is to still have a bit of a coaching role on projects. We want to try and avoid it, that we're ever running a project. It's not exact, we're not set up that the directors would be the ones that you talk to every day. But we want to keep our, we like to keep particular clients, relationships. And I really enjoy now kind of coaching younger members of staff and sort of going, well, look, yes, I kind of see what you're thinking there, but actually have you tried thinking about it this way? I think the thing that we both have to spend quite a lot of our time doing is that unlocking of projects, that kind of creativity around problem solving. And I think, I did a podcast recently with Ben Cross from General Project, who was trained as an architect, now obviously works in development. And, that was one of the things that I really resonated that he was saying, is that he still uses all of his architectural mindset to kind of unlock these problems, these roadblocks that you get in projects, where it's just if you can step back sometimes and kind of think around it, you can come up with a solution that is, slightly outside the box. And that's, I think, probably what Jon and I both spend quite a lot of our time doing, is sort of doing that across multiple projects, trying to unlock them, get them to the next stage.
As well as working on the business, scaling it, and
Yes.
making sure the next project is coming for the team.
Exactly,
to
and
be able
sales
to
and lead gen and all the rest of it that you have to do. And you do end up spread quite thin, but I think, that the bit that I don't do now is sit on CAD and draw stuff really ever. So, but I kind of miss it sometimes, but not that much.
So the two of you kind of left, set the business up, worked on that first project. The second project came. Can you talk to me about the early stages in terms of building a team and how you kind of navigated those early challenges too?
Yeah, well, I think when you set up, and I'm probably quoting somebody else here, but that you basically end up, it's Daniel Priestley, you kind of just end up hiring anyone because it's fun, and the people that you can hire in a startup are quite an odd bunch of people. So it's very unlikely that the people that you hire in the first year will be there in year 10. And that is true of us. There's nobody that's there except for me and Jon, because who is going to go and work for a company of 3 people? It's the people that are a bit wild themselves, and they're like, oh, I might do this for a bit. It's very hard to build a team of loyal people when you are a startup, because you're getting the sort of the pirates, the outliers, the people that kind of want to set up their company. Whereas now, the people that we can hire, now that we've been going for 10 years and we've got a decent office and we've got a reputation, we can get really, really great people. And we do tend to be slightly counter-cyclical in terms of because we're small and we have quite a lot of revenue split across quite a lot of projects, we tend to feel sooner the bite of negativity in the economy and also positivity. So, as an example, 18 months ago, when the Ukraine first invasion happened, that hit us quite quickly, just because certain funding streams were turned off, and it sort of it hit us quicker than, say, a Hawkins Brown, or any big architect, where the revenue is a bit more lumpy. You get sort of projects have their momentum and they'll just keep going. Our ones sort of switched off quicker, and then we'll tend to then feel so at the moment, we're starting to notice the kind of the green shoots, and maybe lots of others are as well. But it means that we tend to hire at the opposite time to other people, which is good, because we get to, when it's tougher on those companies is when we start to pick up, and we can then hire decent, really good senior people from other practices when they're maybe not so in demand in the rest of the market.
And in terms of the business model, as it were, are you retained on project? How do the kind of the financials work in terms of the different parts of architecture and how you deliver or forecast?
Okay, slightly, yeah. It's a fixed fee for each project stage. So there are 7 stages in a project. But the numbers are sort of slightly weird. Reba stages, basically.
So it matches the 7 different Reba stages, and then your price according to the project. And so it's kind of like a retainer on a...
Well, so it's a fixed fee, but say that you appointed me and you've got a site and we're going to get, 100 unit scheme is what we're targeting. We'll go, right, planning application. Let's do pre-app. It's going to be 3 pre-apps and a planning application. And mostly we'll fix the fee to there, because that's reasonably easy to predict. You don't tend to provide your fees necessarily all the way through the project, because you sometimes don't quite know. Sometimes we are asked to do that, and you're like, we haven't had one pre-app. How do I know what it's going to cost to build it? It's very hard to predict. So usually we'll do fees up to planning. Yeah. So for a certain number of pre-apps and then planning, then we'll be asked. Ideally, we would then be asked to provide more fees to do stage 3 and 4, which is kind of technical design, and then stage 5 and 6, which is site. And then we'll try and draw it down monthly. There's different. And one of the things that is annoying is that there is quite lack of consistency across the industry in terms of like how fees negotiated and paid. And it's something that I'm always banging on about, that RIBA should give slightly more guidance on. In the 80s, in the bad old days when I wasn't an architect, so I don't care and I never knew about it, but there were like fee scales. And then that was seen as anti-competitive. And then lots of architects kind of whine on about the good old days of when there was set fees. But I do think it would be quite simple for RIBA to not say here's mandatory fee scales, but just to provide a bit of guidance to clients. Because I think often clients don't know. And there are lots of architects who will do lots of bits of work for free, hoping that on the back end they'll get something. And so it does mean you'll get, often project managers saying to clients, well, look, you don't really need to pay for this bit. I'm sure there's an architect that'll do this bit for free, or you can chip these guys against each other. So for me, I feel like there is an opportunity for RIBA to come out and say, look, this is just the best practice for what you should expect to pay for an architect for X, Y, Z. I'll just keep saying it until somebody listens to me.
But I guess for you then, the ideal situation is acquiring a project, taking it through planning, and then taking it, ongoing. So you've got that continuation and you've got that fee stream that you can kind of plan. But I also assume other people might get planning and then they might put it on pause, and then maybe bring in a slightly different architect to deliver the other part.
Yeah,
is that kind of what happens as well?
Yeah, it happens quite frequently. And so we'll sometimes deliver stuff that other people got planning for, and then the project was sold. So often we'll have ongoing relationships with clients that will buy something that has already got planning. Yeah. And then at that point, we'll be appointed to go back to planning to maybe improve it via an NMA or a Section 73, try and optimize it slightly, tweak it to their design preferences, and then deliver it out. So that's something that happens quite a lot, is that, the site will be sold with planning and then a different team will deliver it.
So in terms of the building of the business, you touched on the kind of the counter-cyclical nature of and the ability or the early indicators you get when maybe there's some challenges or there's some good times. You've talked about kind of hiring some kind of generalists. How did you kind of go through that transition from hiring generalists to kind of specialists? Is it when you got kind of headcount of 10, or is it when you kind of really started working on the business in terms of building like the systems and processes and really defining what different roles were, and then you could be very particular with the types of individuals that came in?
So I think there was a very important moment to us about 3 years in when I joined this thing that was called the Supper Club, which I think is now called Helm, which is like an entrepreneurs network. And at the first meeting, so you're sitting around with all these other business owners that aren't in the architecture space. None of them were. And they were all talking about their non-execs and what their non-execs are saying. I was like, really sorry, what's a non-exec? And they were like, you haven't got a non-exec? And I was like, no, I don't even know what one is. They were like, don't worry, we'll make you a shortlist. So the Supper Club then kind of went away, and they were like, all right, this guy's just exited a business. He'd be great for you. Here's another one. And so we hired a non-exec at that point. And that was really game changing for us, because suddenly you've got, like you said, did you have mentors? Well, we didn't until then. And we purposely chose a mentor that was not from the architecture space, but he had a really good knowledge of it. So he had built and sold a business called Saphira, which was, it's a piece of software. So he was actually selling it into the architects. So, he built software that was sold to architects. So he really knew architects, but wasn't one.
Got it. So he knew the industry,
but he was from a software background, which we really wanted. We wanted like somebody with like startup mentality, with business. He'd been to like, I think, one of the prestigious business schools, and we wanted somebody that was like that. Like architects get a bit of a reputation for being shit at business. We wanted somebody that was like really the opposite end. There's not people in the tech startup space that are often, being called bad business people. They're often very shrewd, and his background was sales as well. So we were like, this is a guy for us. And he really helped shape our business, sculpt it, asked us difficult questions. I think in the first meeting we had with him, we said, so these are our projections, and we think that we're going to grow by 25 to 30% this year. And he sort of looked at it and he was like, so what if I were to just ask you if you could grow 100% in the next 12 months? We were like, well, I mean, that sounds easy to say. And he was like, well, just think about what you would need to do. What would you need to put in place for that to happen? So we went away. Next board meeting, we came back and we were like, we'd have to do this and this and this. We'd have to hire these people and put them in place, and we'd have to have like a different structure, and we'd have to step back and stop running projects. And he was like, And then lo and behold, we did that, and we literally doubled our revenue from one year to the next, put in place a senior management team, put in place more specialists around finance, tried to put in place more of a process around BD. And it worked. And, we doubled our revenue that year. So that was when it started to get serious, I think. And then what we tend to find is our growth happens quite erratically or irregularly. So we'll have a year where it doubles, and then we have a year where it flattens, and then we'll have a year where it doubles, and then we have a year where it flattens, because you can't constantly grow. So we tend to find that we follow an upward trend and then consolidate.
Yeah.
But we do sort of plan for that. So we don't always plan to double, but we plan to have years of pushing for growth, and then years where we're just consolidating.
And so that non-exec was the one that really held you to account, challenged you to think better, shared some wisdom around sales, process, execution, client acquisition, hiring. I
mean, hiring is such a skill, and at the start you kind of make up all these different processes, don't you? And obviously you don't, you're a recruiter, but I think, at the end of it, we had certain people advising us, we'll just hire fast, fire fast, bring them in, get them in, if they're crap, get rid. But now that we've been doing it for longer, I think we can attract really good talent at a junior level, but for those senior hires, I think you hire slow, and I think you've got to kiss lots of frogs, and you've got to make sure you've got the right person. And we have a much more rigorous, slow process of bringing people in now at any level, but particularly at a senior level. And there's such a skill to hiring, that cultural match, but then not making sure you're not just copying yourself with little mini-me's. And it's a real balancing act, to get somebody that fits in, but isn't just, you haven't favoured them because they remind you of you. It's a tough one.
It is a big challenge. We bang on the fact, identifying people has never been easier, but actually all the other parts of engagement, assessment, role defining, what does success look like? They're the other kind of the challenges that often people kind of overlook. But it sounds like as a journey and as a business, you've kind of been there and done it. Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much. What's been the hardest thing in terms of kind of scaling the business?
What's the hardest thing? I think it's all hard. I think what's difficult in our industry that's probably particular is there's just a real blancmange of legislation that's come out of the government in response to Grenfell. And I totally support the thinking behind a lot of it, but the implementation of some of that has left a lot of architects quite confused about our responsibility. Nobody wants, bad outcomes like Grenfell to happen again. What everybody was hoping was that there would be a greater level of clarity through the legislation that came out subsequently. And I have to say, I think that some of the legislation that's come out after it has not created more certainty for architects over exactly what their responsibilities are. We all want to make sure we're doing exactly the right thing that we should be doing at the time. But some of this legislation is tended to make things more opaque rather than less. And, I think it is starting. I think we're getting past the worst of it now. The Building Safety Act has come out and there's more guidance around that. And I think that is going to give architects a level of responsibility and therefore control that they haven't had for a generation. And this is one of the things that architects sort of, have whined on about historically is, we've sort of been put a bit in the corner, but, this project management is kind of taking the lead, greater role for X, Y, Z. Building Safety Act is very clear now that there is a lot of responsibility that the architect as principal designer will have to have. So this is like our opportunity to embrace this legislation now and go, okay, come on guys, look, the legislation is saying we need to be responsible and we need to make sure that we're competent and we need to demonstrate that competency. And if we do that, then that means we basically get like a very central role in making sure that the rest of the team is also competent and the rest of the team are the right people. Well, that's great. That's putting responsibility and control back to the architect. That's what we've been talking about for years, is protection of role rather than protection of title. It's now in front of us. So rather than running from this new legislation scared, we should be using this opportunity and saying, look, we're very happy this is here and seeking maybe a little bit more clarity around some of it. But other than that, it's reasonably clear that it's architects that need to be taking control of projects up to a point.
And I guess, point you touched on earlier is just that relationship with planners and council. And if you can understand what they want, and you can design best-in-class, sustainable buildings that is a win-win-win for developer, resident, and council, then surely that feeds back to your point of you taking a central role in terms of really trying to drive that agenda and develop great outcomes.
Absolutely. So yeah, exactly. I think planning is another area where perhaps the rise of the planning consultant has maybe slightly pushed aside architects. But again, it's another opportunity, or we see it as an opportunity. So we spend a lot of our time trying to make sure that planners think that what we are designing is best in class and is good placemaking. And so that drives all of the events that we do. It drives part of the podcast that we run. So Urban Forecast podcast. We've had lots of planners and politicians on that talking about what is good placemaking, because we want everybody, when they hear Ackroyd Lowrie, to think, okay, those are the guys that are talking about the type of places that we want people to live in. And for that to happen, we have to go out there and sort of put these events on, keep talking about it, so that you start to get that kind of association, which means that hopefully then clients will come to us because we are seen as a safe pair of hands with planners to be able to say, it's an Ackroyd Lowrie scheme, so that means it's going to be these things that we support, which we'll have to see, but it seems to it hopefully is working.
Yeah, well, you touched on, you do a lot in terms of the podcast, the breakfast briefing, the other events. You also do a lot of spec work as well, just in terms of demonstrating capability, which is quite rare in this industry, right?
Well, I don't know if it's rare. I think people do it. What we have tried to do is set out a very defined funnel of how a client will come to us. So they, might first hear of us through a podcast or through our network of consultants that we work with. We also work with a political consultant that we have on a retainer to make sure that we are messaging correctly to the local authorities and that they're aware of us and have that kind of reputation managed with local authorities. So through this net, we'll be cast people. And then the first thing that we would try and do is get them to one of our BCB events. Breakfast Club Briefing events, where we're then associated with the speakers. So we'll tend to get like an MP, senior politician, to be the speaker. And then in the room, there will hopefully be officers from several London boroughs. Mostly it is London.
In terms of the work that you do and the types of individuals.
And then there's together. Mostly the guests that we will, the attendees of that event. So we'll get a few developers but then senior officers from local authorities. And that just, the point of that is it's all Chatham House and it's behind closed doors. But you get to hear what people really think, developers, planners, architects, consultants. And, more often than not, people actually tend to agree. If you take away, planners and developers don't always have the best relationship because they're mostly meeting across the table at a pre-application meeting and they're disagreeing about quite small things actually. In general, those developers and planners, if you put them in the same room with a nice breakfast away from a particular project, everybody kind of does agree around the outcomes. But it's also part of our lead generation funnel that will be the first time a potential new client will come. We'll invite them to one of those events and we'll see, they will get to see this dialogue happening. Out the back of that, they might go, okay, well, look, I've got a site and we have like a particular product which they will get, which is a free product, which is it's a capacity study. We know how long it takes us to do. It's part of our marketing budget that we will do that for clients. It's not infinite. It's driving people towards our core product, which is, a planning application, technical design package, whatever it is. That's our core product, which is you pay for that. But before that, there is a free product, which is, it's a sort of, freemium, if you like, where you get to test out what it's like working with us. And what we're trying to prove there is knowledge of the context, we're a team that we can bring together quickly, like a planning consultant or, structural engineer, whatever you happen to need, speed of response, and, most importantly for us, high quality design. We want quickly clients to be able to say, oh, these guys, not only a safe pair of hands, they know the local authority, they kind of know some of the people at the local authority, and the design proposal they've presented to us is really good. And that's why we do it. And that's why it is part of a funnel. And, I wrote an article recently for BD about this and got lots of the comments back saying, I can't believe you work for free. Don't people just take the piss? If people take the piss at that and they do it repeatedly, you know who they are. You're not going to do it again and again and again. It's it needs to lead to paid work at a certain point, because that's how we fund doing it again the next time round. But yeah, thus far it's a reasonably. But I don't think it's uncommon in other industries for you to have freemium. So
I was going to say it's not an uncommon thing that you're talking about, but it's almost taking those principles from maybe the tech world,
exactly,
and going, how can we apply that to a bit more of an antiquated industry so that we can kind of bring people into our, as you touched on, using your word, our orbit, and then through a funnel and using kind of lead gen, which is
towards core services. And so I think that we've always invested a lot in like advisors, because we sort of maybe didn't have these mentors or didn't necessarily want mentors in the architecture space. So as well as a non-exec, I've done the Daniel Priestley KPI, and that talks a lot about trying to build this ecosystem of products. And it takes you a while to do it, but and it sort of permeates your thinking. But now I can, you can see it. There's like a spider web and then the funnel, and the kind of
different touch points.
Yeah, you attract people, and I'd imagine, it'd be interesting to know how many touch points it's taken for a client before they sign on the dotted line. But it's usually a lot, and I think 7 is the thing that's quoted. I don't know if it's that for us, but it would, that you've got to put out a lot of touch points into the world if you want people to follow the breadcrumbs.
What are some of the kind of the challenges that that you see developers facing right now as we kind of sit here approaching middle of the year? Obviously, an election has just been called. We've got a kind of a 6-week run up. There's a naturally, frustratingly, probably inevitably going to be a bit of a slowdown over the summer, just to kind of accommodate the election and then the kind of the implementation there. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing that developers are kind of running into right now?
Number one problem is viability, and that's because of build costs having gone up. Number 2 problem that planners are sort of saying is that the planning system is very slow and often doesn't create the best outcomes for them. But it's viability more than anything. It's those build costs that have really made everybody suffer. And so how do you overcome that?
And what's been driving that? Because obviously Ukraine is partly to blame.
Yeah, I think that COVID was really to blame, and that printing money for an extended period of time will cause inflation. It was then Ukraine and that particular cost shock. Construction prices, some people have been saying that construction values are coming back down again. I don't think that that's that likely, and they went up by 20 to 30%. So that's put a lot of projects underwater. How do you get them back above water? Do you go back to planning? Well, yes, you can, but are planners that sympathetic to a pure viability argument? Some are, some aren't. So, and I think across the industry, what people are starting to see is that there's lots of developers. We're doing, you're kind of reworking old projects, trying to squeeze them a little bit. What does that mean for placemaking? What does that mean, when all the good bits are the bits that you can't afford? It could be that you sort of, the whole of the built environment that you're creating becomes a little bit worse. that would be a really bad outcome, is if everything that we're building now at this period of stress just to get stuff built is not going to stand the test of time, because it was, all of the good stuff was taken away. I would say that our design sort of ethos is that design doesn't have to cost more necessarily. Good design shouldn't cost more. If you're doing the principles right, then you don't need to pay more to have a high quality place. And so I think that is, that's hopefully why a lot of the applications that are being reworked aren't necessarily getting worse. They're just becoming, slightly tighter, slightly more efficient, but the quality of the place that you're creating doesn't necessarily need to fall. I did a podcast, we did a live panel at UK Reef about potential reform to the planning system. So we had Nicholas Boys-Smith, and who talks about planning reform. And it was interesting. There were two developers on the panel, Regal and Capital and Centric, and both said, do you know what? Planning isn't actually that bad. It's not, maybe it could be fine-tuned, but we don't find that getting planning is the hardest thing. So that was quite an interesting reflection, because I think probably for the bigger developers, planning isn't their biggest obstacle. I think it's maybe the smaller developers where funding a big planning application, the cost of planning applications is sort of getting higher and higher. And I do think it probably favors larger developers rather than smaller, because that barrier to entry is so high. But those are the two major things that I think is stifling house building. The problem is, for any incoming government, what levers do you have? There's not a huge amount of spare cash lying around. Does Labour come in and start trying to build its own housing? I don't really think it's got the money, and I hope it doesn't have the appetite, because I don't really think that would be a good way to deliver lots of housing. I think maybe more funding for the planning system would probably pay for itself. I think even actually putting up planning fees might help, but it needs to then be ring fenced. So making sure that any increase in funding for planning is kept within those planning departments so that they can process applications quicker. I think that would be a positive thing.
It's taking so long, right? That's one of the challenges, just the time it takes to go through planning. And I was at UK Reef, and I was there at your event, which was fantastic, and attended a few other talks. And they were, I heard someone say, and I might be ill quoted here, but 25% of planners have kind of left. Yeah. Left as well. And so there's lots of red tape and challenges around actually getting in front of these people, but also the time it takes is stifling.
Planners are being asked to assess more and more stuff. And so, now I gotta have a lot of sympathy for planners. They do a great job, and I don't think the financial rewards are amazing. So they really got to believe in what they do. But they're being asked to check fire strategies and, check environmental performances. And this is stuff that didn't used to be really within planners' remits. So you're getting, it's no surprise that it's taking longer and that they're struggling to resource it. Each application takes a lot of manpower, their side too, or person power, sorry. So yeah, you need more planners and more specialized planners, and you need to invest more in that and get things through quicker if you want planners to check everything. Or you say that they don't need to check as much stuff, and then you don't need bigger planning departments. Again, there's not that many levers, so maybe you do the latter rather than the former. If you haven't got money to pay for it, maybe you just be like, okay, well, slightly more free reign. Planners don't check X, Y, Z. We put that onto building control to check. That's sort of one option. But the only so the government's targets mostly have been to build 300,000 units per year of housing. That's only ever been done when the private sector. So the private sector does about 180 to 200,000 per year. This year it'll be lower, and then the balance is made up by the public sector. So there would probably be a temptation from Labour to say, well, look, let's go, let's do this ourselves. I think development has become so complicated and so specialist that we're not in 1948. You can't just go out and build yourself lots of houses. What I would say the best way of delivering more housing is to provide more grants. So I think that there's lots of housing associations already. There's lots of developers that would be happy to provide affordable housing if grant were paid to an adequate level to make it worth their while doing it, rather than trying to reduce your amount of affordable housing on every development, which is sort of the incentive. The incentive at the moment is to do that. It would be to increase the grant and let the private sector develop more of it, and local authorities can have a crack at it via arm's length HAs if they want, but thus far in London that doesn't seem to have had brilliant outcomes for everyone, because there's just it's a risky business and it's easy to go wrong. So I think let the private sector and the HAs deliver more of it, put the grant up, and that would be my preference of how to deliver more housing.
You obviously are very experienced in terms of the realities of seeing what your developer investor clients are going through, but you also have got your own development project as well. Can you just talk to me a little bit about that? Because I guess switch the other side of the fence and you can have your developer hat on too. Yeah,
so and I think it's there's sort of a risk talking about that, because I think there have been some people that have said to us, well, we don't want to be competing with this architect now that you're developing. But it's not our main bread and butter. But we did take the decision a few years ago that we wanted to do some development, really because we kind of wanted to learn from that experience. What's it like being on the other side of the fence? So we we set up an SPV with a planning consultant that we work with, and we acquired a site in an area where we knew the planning context reasonably well. And we were able to secure planning. It still took us 2 years, but we were able to secure planning this year for a residential-led scheme. And we've learned a lot. We've learned lots of stuff that I didn't expect to learn. The planning wasn't the hard bit of that necessarily. It took its time, but in the end, we got a scheme that both us and the council were very happy with. But it's that that viability that is the challenge. In the period that we've owned that site, construction prices have gone up. They've driven out some of the margin for that. So now that we've got our consent, we've got to work out what's next. Can it be sold and pay back the costs that it's taken to achieve the planning, or is it something that we need to JV with a contractor on to actually get back that value? Those are the decisions that we're making at the moment, and probably the economic impact of the election might make a difference. So for the moment, we're sitting tight and seeing what happens.
Pens down.
Yeah, exactly.
For the next 6 weeks, then through the summer period.
And that's if that's happening to us, it's happening to a load of other people. That is the problem with uncertainty, political uncertainty. And we've had so much political uncertainty, even within one party, the ruling party that we've had for 13 years. There's been so much political uncertainty that I do think a lot of developers are just the ones that can afford to. It's cheaper to sit there and do nothing and make sure that you don't start embarking upon something which ends up being the wrong decision. And you've had that from the moment of that Brexit vote. You had people sitting on their hands waiting to see what would happen. Then you had it again with the actual leaving of the EU. Then you had it with COVID, then you had it with Ukraine, now you have it now with another election. What we need is a period of political certainty given by a strong government, and hopefully that's what we get. But I'm not that certain that that's going to happen either.
Can you just tell me about the size of Ackroyd Lowrie as a business right now? And then I'm also keen to kind of touch on, you do an academy as well, and I'd be really interested to find out a little bit more about that. But yeah, just tell me about the size and scale.
Yeah, so we've got about
business
20 people, and we at our highest we had about 30, and then this has been a couple of year period of we haven't had to let anyone go, but it's just you get an actual shrinkage. But as I said, we're feeling it tick back up now, which is good. The academy is something that we're very proud of. So we it sort of came out of our top line ethos as a business is we want to build the company that designs the cities of the future. And what we found is that a lot of people that enter architecture are like myself, not from cities. I'm from like the suburbs, and that's quite a lot of the demographic of people that go into architecture didn't grow up in inner London areas. So we wanted to build some sort of academy system that would bring kind of young people. It's not even seen as like something it doesn't get taught in school, so it's not something that you necessarily think of as an obvious career path. So we wanted to kind of correct that, and we wanted to bring in this next generation of architects that actually grew up in London, in the boroughs that we work in and we have our office in, so Tower Hamlets, Hackney, Newham. So it took us a long time, and at the same time as we had that thought about wanting to, get this like diversity of thought around the future of cities, we sort of watched the Sir Alex Ferguson documentary, where he scribbles on paper and creates this academy that then you get Gary Neville, Phil Neville, David Beckham, Ryan Giggs all come through the academy. And so we were like, oh wow, this could actually work out very well just from a recruitment basis. We could be recruiting our own talent. And the reality was, it took us about 5 years to get this thing off the ground. I've knocked on so many doors, banged my head against so many walls, trying to find people at councils that we were like, okay, we want to set up an apprenticeship scheme, just give us the kids. And they're like, it doesn't sound like a thing that we do. Eventually, we set up a partnership with New City College, who are an academy where we take their BTEC students who are on the built environment and construction course, and we do 6 pupils per year, and they have to have 40 days in our office per year, and we kind of have them on this rota, and it's brilliant. We've just had our first one graduate, and then he will be then coming back to us, but in partnership with London South Bank University as a paid apprentice. So for the BTECs, they're unpaid, but that's because they're 16 to 18. Then they graduate with enough UCAS points to go to a university place that we then provide. So they come back 4 days a week, and they just stay with us, but working as an apprentice. And that will then give them their qualification after 4 years. So they never have to pay a penny. It's all provided free. In fact, from the point that they graduate the BTEC, they are paid a wage. So rather than getting 100 grand in debt or whatever it is over your 7 years of architectural training, you can be earning money as you go. So we're really pleased with that, and hopefully it does generate the David Beckham of the future of architecture.
Yeah, future talent for you, but also bringing other people into the wider kind of the real estate ecosystem who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be able to afford it or
see it as or find it exactly, or find it. Yeah.
Can you just talk to me a little bit about the types of projects that you've got on the go at the moment? And then are there any trends that you're noticing in terms of the types of projects that you're coming your way as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, as I said, we're kind of a good bellwether for what happens in the industry. And what we've seen is the larger residential-led schemes are tending towards ending up in the hands of housing associations. So whether they be for-profit HAs or sort of not-for-profit housing associations, anything that's kind of 100 units plus is tending to be housing association driven. So we got consent, I think about a year ago, for a 140 unit scheme in Croydon, which was for a private developer, but that was then bought by a housing association, and we are sort of optimizing that now through the planning process again, and that will be delivered out. We're doing quite a lot of work for major housing association who are a for-profit. So we just got consent for them for 97 units in Barking and Dagenham. And we're looking at and we're delivering out another 60 or so in Redbridge. So that's the sort of trend on the resi side. On the private developer side, I would say the focus is shifting towards more co-living, student, and hotel. So you aren't finding a lot of typical small, medium property developers trying to build out a lot of resi just because it doesn't stack for them. And that's a shame, because they are still doing stuff. It's just the stuff that they're building, it needs to be more alternative, because that's where they're getting the returns. And I think we're seeing as well on the sort of the funds side, in the right location, everybody's diving back in. So the offices in Soho and Clerkenwell are a higher value than they were pre-COVID. So people are now in the right areas building offices again, but not if they're in the wrong areas. If they're in the wrong areas, everything needs to end up resi, I think, because that certain markets are just dead and they're not going to come back. And we're also seeing much more of an emphasis on retrofit. So we've got an application in at the moment, which is for a really big retrofit scheme in Camberwell of the old Magistrates Court. So that's a live application. And that's really exciting because that site was actually allocated for a knockdown and rebuild, but became kind of economically and also environmentally a better choice to strip that big old concrete frame back and not knock the frame down, work with the frame, extend it, rejig it a little bit, but most of the bones of that structure remains, and that's going to be resi, hotel, and interesting commercial units at ground floor, podcasting studio, really community kind of based ground floor uses. And we're also providing like a new kind of market square. So that's a scheme that we're really, really excited about. Amazing.
Well, look, you had a phenomenal career. It sounds like one interview, second interview, one job through to kind of setting up your own business. And I know you pay a hell of a lot forward. You give an awful lot. You get a lot of energy, I know, from kind of connecting people as well. And I know you've worked on some unbelievable schemes. So I'm really excited to see what you and the business go on to achieve through this rather kind of volatile year. As we draw to a close, Ollie, a question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, who are the people, what property and which place would you allocate £500 million worth of capital if I gave that to you?
So for me, it's all about the people, but I don't know who those people are. I would put most of that money into an academy, like building the academy. And I would want to take it to other countries, other places. The model, what I just said about architecture favouring, the kind of the whatever middle class people from the suburbs of Surrey, is true globally. That 500 million, if you could do an academy in Lagos, if you could do an academy in Bahrain, bring people into the industry that haven't otherwise got the opportunity. That issue that architecture has is global. So that's, I would invest the money in people and places around the world where those opportunities don't currently exist. So I hope that's not too much of a cop-out answer.
Yeah, a little. Well, in a sense. So you spend your 500 million, and then is there a particular property, location, or type of asset class that you would hope that these future designers or future architects that come through would focus on?
For me, it's like my general thinking is that cities are the answer. We've got a rapidly urbanizing global population. So I think people need to think about how we create, cities are the answer because they are more efficient, they're more sustainable. And I know this is going to be, again, a bit of a cop-out to you, but it's like, I think you need to have really high quality mixed use urban realms that are well supplied by, kind of farmland around them, right? Otherwise humanity is going to have some serious problems because we've got a growing global population. And we've also got the problem that parts of the world are going to be uninhabitable. So you're going to just get forced migration into places that are where we are now, Northern Europe, a bit cooler. We're going to have to increase the size of our cities quite significantly and increase the density of them and the supply, the infrastructure around them. So these architects need to be tackling that problem, which is how do you cope with more people in the world living in fewer places and supply them with food? I think you don't need to say what asset class it needs to be. You just need to solve, you've got to crack that really complicated problem. So that's the problem for our children to solve probably.
And 500 million is not going to cut that.
It's probably not, but I think, if you can build the people, if you can educate, it all starts with teaching those people, stuff, how to do things, how to problem solve. So that's the point of spreading that investment into as many people as possible so they can come up with a solution.
Well, Ollie, like I said, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great.
What you and the team go on to do.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information. Or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you